I've been working on the dungeon for the Giants vs. Dragons game. I wanted to draw out a bit of a dungeon. I actually didn't really have much of an idea in mind. The entire birth of the dungeon was that I found a really cool map that I wanted to use. And I think I mentioned on Twitter, but I can't remember, but I'm definitely just like stealing maps. Like, I don't want to sit down and have to draw out a big dungeon map. And initially my thought was going to be that the dungeon underneath the keep was just going to be this one map. And then I would have other things in the area for the players to go do. But after looking at the map for a while, and then I found this other map that I really wanted to use. And so I started to just kind of build up the maps. I started to connect the maps together and kind of build a story for it. And I downloaded a whole bunch of other maps. Like the first one I got is a pretty big one, but the rest of them are smaller. And then I went into just Microsoft Paint, and I've been jamming the maps together to make a bigger map. And so, like, the first level of the dungeon, I am using 8 squares per inch graph paper. It takes 2 sheets. And the second level is 50% bigger than the first level, and ends up needing 4 sheets of that graph paper in order to be mapped. And then I've already started working on the third level, and I'm stopping there. One of the big deals is you do not go beyond what you need. The problem was I had a number of maps that I really wanted to stick. Like 4 different maps could have worked in this one position, and I ended up picking one. But because the others all fit so neatly, they ended up being used on the third level, one below it, just because it seemed to work out. And then that's when I stopped. I said, nope, the third level's not done. We know what the third level's supposed to be. Stop messing with it, and you can come back and do it later. But it's going to take a year and a half for anybody to find their way down to that level and deal with anything. So I've kind of, like I said, I've used Microsoft Paint to just arrange the maps together in a way that they fit and that makes sense. And now I'm going back, kind of refining some of the ideas about the dungeon as a whole. One of the Twitter posts I put up the other day kind of goes over the first 7 layers of the dungeon, just the names of the levels. So the first level is the Tomb of the Ancient Sovereign, and then the second level is the Sunken Palace, and it has a sub-level, which are the Flooded Crypts, and then the third level is the Menagerie, and the fourth level is the Sunless Sea, and then it has a sub-level which is literally underneath the Sunless Sea, so it's the surface of it versus the depths, and so on and so forth. Like I forget what 5 is, but anyway, so yeah, I have an idea of what the dungeon is now. I know how it got created, even though I know part of it is the rearrangement of the borderlands when it was under the influence of the Waste. That's how they initially came together, but there's been changes to it since. And I don't quite have an idea of what kind of monsters and things are going to be inside the dungeon, other than a few specific ones. But as far as like fleshing out who's going to be where, that's going to be my next step. I'm also still working on the keep. I have a map. I once again went online and found a map of a keep and stole it, and that's going to be what I populate for the home base. And I've been kind of working on Candle Jack's personality and what happens and how he came to be and his history. Again, not in excruciating detail, just broad strokes to give myself an idea of what to do going forward. But you do need, of course, to populate the keep with actual people with some personalities and some histories and some storylines to make it seem nice, and then work on the dungeon. My actual next step that I want to do, I'm not going to have time to do it at any given point, but I would really love to sit down with a printout of the map that I have and just really pore over the details of it and start boxing off areas to say, okay, this area is the screaming cavern of wisdom, etc. I don't have that yet. I just have a vague idea of what I want to do. So that's next. But I did finally figure out how the first and second level tie together. I figured out at least one cool encounter for the first level. Although, not that it's going to happen anytime soon, because according to the map, this guy's buried towards the back. And yeah, and I'm still, I posted an idea the other day. It was inspired by watching an anime called Tower of God, which I watched the whole series the other night when I had insomnia. Pretty cool anime. But there's the very opening of the show where the kid enters the tower, and then there's this huge wall beyond which is essentially water. Maybe not water, maybe the creature that he's up against can fly. But it just looks like a big giant tank of water, and there's this huge eel thing in there. And I was like, I want that in the dungeon, because one of the fun parts of a Megadungeon is that you can see stuff you can see things and kind of get an idea that they exist, even though you can't do anything about them. There's another dungeon that I remember from a long time ago, and they had this giant anti-magic impenetrable glass tube that ran from one of the upper levels all the way down to one of the lower levels. And it made appearances on all the levels in between. So you could find just a room somewhere where this glass tube went through. And on the very bottom, we'll just say it's the 8th level of the dungeon, it's in a beholder's lair. And the beholder, every so often, would just go up the tube and take a look around what's happening on all the different levels. So I think the upper end of it was on level 2 or 3 of the dungeon. So second or third level characters are adventuring around, and they can literally walk into a room and see a beholder floating in the middle of the room. And fortunately, it's behind a big anti-magic impenetrable glass shield, so it can't hurt them. But it gives them something to look forward to way later, and it keeps coming up on the levels in between, so you don't necessarily forget about it. So between that Tower of God scene and that remembrance of the beholder tube, I wanted my sunless sea to be visible at multiple levels. And so on the second level, there is an observation platform, like a glass platform over the top of an opening in this sea, this giant underground sea. And it likewise is this impenetrable anti-magic glass, so you can't really get into the ocean from there. And then on the level beneath that, the third level, which is the menagerie, that's the one that very specifically has it, just like an aquarium where they have those glass tubes you can walk through and you can see the water and the fish and stuff around you. Well, the same thing in this dungeon. Like, there's going to be an area of that level where you can look into the giant sunless sea and see things swimming around in there. Now, given visibility and everything, you're not going to be able to do much about it. And then there is the question of if the surface of the sea is below the menagerie, how's that going to work? So we're going to have to figure that stuff out as we go. But that's stuff for future Eldrick to worry about. Current Eldrick needs to just worry about looking at the very first level of the dungeon, maybe peeking at the second level, coming up with a few places where they connect together, other than the obvious staircases, and then start making some alterations. I'm not going to use the maps as is. I'm going to alter things. Not even just so much that because people might find the map and then it's like, oh, we can cheat because we have the map. Just to make the story make sense for me, because I'm using a pre-made map and then building a story into it versus kind of having an idea and then drawing a map that supports that idea. So I'll make some alterations to make it kind of flow better. Yeah, that's about 10 minutes worth of stuff. Working on all that. I've kind of put the system setting stuff to the background because there's no real point for me having a working knowledge of GURPS until there's a need for people to actually sit down at a table and play this. But yeah, I'm going to keep in mind the mantra, don't create more than you need to. Some of it is I'm creating more because I need to understand things, like the way that the second level impacts the third level, impacts the fourth level. I do have to have at least a conceptual understanding of that, but I don't have to sit down and map it out and key everything and all of that. So, all right, until next time, everybody. Bye-bye.